Welcome back for day 5 of the Blender Basics Bootcamp. Today we're going to learn about image-based lighting, and we'll add a couple lights to our scene so we can get a better feel for the materials we create in the next few videos. This should be pretty straightforward, so let's get to it. My name is Chris Folia. I'm your Stream Scholar. Welcome to Stream School. So before we actually light anything, there's a couple things we need to take care of. First of all, I'm going to go over to the render properties by going all the way to the right and clicking on the camera icon. Here, I'm going to go all the way to the bottom where it says color management, click the drop down, and here we want to change the view transform from filmic to standard. Filmic is a flat color profile. It's really designed to be color graded later. I think for our absolute very first Blender project, we probably want something that looks nice without having to do any additional post-processing. Secondly, we want to set up a nice rendered preview window so we can actually see our lighting as we're working on it. To do that, I'm going to go ahead and make this left panel a little bit bigger. Then I'm going to go all the way down to the lower left-hand corner where my mouse becomes a crosshair, click and drag up to split it vertically. Then I'm going to go up to the upper left-hand drop-down and change that to 3D viewport. At this point, we need to add a camera to our scene. That'll provide us a viewpoint for our actual final rendered output. It'll also give us a nice preview window for our rendered preview. So to do that, I'm going to hit Shift-A to bring up the add menu, go down to where it says camera, and now we have a camera in our scene. However, we're not looking through it yet. So to do that, I'm going to go up here to the upper left, hit View, Cameras, and change that to active camera. The hotkey for that, if you want to do it faster, is just numpad 0. But you're going to notice we're kind of looking straight into our trophy case, which is not super ideal. So let's go ahead and fix that. I'm going to hit 3 on my numpad to go to right orthographic, hold Z to go to wireframe. Then I'm going to hit Alt-R to reset my camera rotation, which makes it look like we're kind of going through like a turbo tunnel or something. Then I'm going to hit Alt-G to reset my camera location. At this point, I'm going to hit R, -90 on my keyboard, hit Enter to set that in place so our camera's facing the right way. Then I'm going to hit G and just move my camera back until we have our trophy nice and framed. Somewhere around there. Doesn't have to be absolutely perfect, and we can always change this later. But this is a pretty boring front-on view of our trophy. So to fix that, let's go ahead and rotate it. I'm going to hit 7 to go to top orthographic. And now if I hit R, you're going to notice that the camera just rotates around its own pivot. It's almost like it's shaking its head no, which is correct because we don't want to do that. We want to rotate our camera around the trophy. And there's actually a really neat trick for that. So I'm going to select the trophy, hold Shift S to bring my Snap To menu up. I'm going to move my mouse down to cursor to selected and then release Shift S. So now our 3D cursor is on the trophy. And here I just have to select the camera, and to change the pivot point from the camera to the 3D cursor, we just have to go up here to the little chain link drop down, click it and change it to 3D cursor. Now if I rotate my camera by hitting R, you'll notice that it's rotating around the trophy, which is super useful. So I'm just gonna adjust this until I feel like it is correct, maybe somewhere around here. And again, we can always change this later. I'm just gonna click to set it down. And at this point, we need to clean up our rendered preview window just so it's not so cluttered with all this nonsense. So I'm gonna go ahead and hit T to hide the toolbar, go up here to the bow and arrow icon and click that to hide all the widgets and stuff. And then finally, to get rid of the text and the grid and the 3D cursor on the outlines, I'm just gonna click this little chain link thing that's highlighted, and that'll hide all of that. And finally, before we forget, we need to reset our pivot point, or else that's gonna be really embarrassing later, like in the previous 3 takes of this tutorial. So I'm gonna click the drop down and change that to median point. And finally, we are ready to turn this into a rendered preview. So to do that, I'm gonna go up to the upper left-hand panel, and here, there's a shiny circle button that you can click, or you already know the hotkey for this. If you just hold Z, you can go to wireframe, you can go to solid, or if you move your mouse up, you can go to rendered preview. So I'm just gonna hover my mouse over rendered, release Z, and now we have the ugliest rendered preview that you ever did see. It's just solid gray. So to fix this, we need to add some lights, and today we're going to use two different kinds of lighting. The first is image-based lighting, which allows us to use a 360-degree image to add some lighting detail to our scene. Unfortunately, in the current rendering engine that we're using right now, which is Eevee, the image doesn't contribute to shadows or anything. It's really more just useful for fill lighting. So the second kind of light we're going to use is just a standard CG light. Now, to do the image-based lighting, we need a 360-degree high dynamic range image. What I mean by that is an image that has more than 8 bits of depth to it, which means it can have whites that are brighter than white, which Blender knows how to use for lighting data, which is really cool. But you might be asking, hey, Chris, where do I find a 360-degree high dynamic range image? That sounds like it's probably really expensive. And normally you'd be right, but there's a really cool new-ish, at least it's new to me, new-ish website called HDRIhaven.com. And they have a whole bunch of completely free, Creative Commons Zero free, you can use it for whatever you want, free, 360-degree HDRIs, or high dynamic range images, which is amazing. It's just such an incredible effort from those guys. And the one I'm using specifically is called Ballroom, and I'll link that in the description down below. But if you want to explore the website, I'd encourage you to go find an HDRI that you like, that you want to use on the scene. You could even put this in like a snowy field if you really wanted to. So anyway, to implement our HDRI, all you have to do is go over to the right to the world settings, click on it, go over to where it says color, click the little yellow dot, and here you want to choose environment texture, and immediately you're gonna notice that's really pink. That's not exactly what we're looking for. Well, the default when you don't have an image linked in an image texture in Blender is bright pink. It tells you immediately, hey, something's wrong and I need to fix that. So anyway, over on the right, if you hit the brand new open button and find your texture, which by the way, I have 3 different versions of the Ballroom, a 2K, a 4K, and an 8K resolution Ballroom HDRI. And that's because I like to work with the lower resolution one to get my scene looking the way I want. And then for the final rendered result, I swap it out for the gigantic, massive 93 megabyte one. So I'm gonna go ahead and double click my 2K Ballroom HDRI image. That's redundant, HDRI image. But I'm just gonna double click it, that'll bring it in, and now it's immediately affecting our lighting. And the other cool thing that HDRIs do, is they add reflections to your scene as well once we have some metallic objects, which is going to be super useful in the next video. But anyway, this is now affecting our lighting, but if we rotate around and zoom out, you'll notice we can also see our 360-degree image in the 3D viewport, which is super cool. And the first thing you might want to do is rotate it. You might want to adjust where the light is coming from, and that is very easy to do. So for that, I'm going to go down to the lower left-hand corner. I'm going to change this panel to a shader editor. Now, we're not going to work on any object shaders in this video, but we're going to work on the world. So I'm going to go up here where it says object, click on it, and I'm going to change that to world. So navigating this little panel, the node editor, is exactly the same as everywhere else in Blender. You can hold your middle mouse button down to pan around, or you can use your scroll wheel to zoom in and out. And I'm also going to hit N to hide the properties panel over here, just to give us a little bit more real estate to work. I might even make it a little bit bigger just so you can see what's going on. So here we have our ballroom texture going into a background node where you can change the strength of the lighting. And then that goes into the world output, which is where all of whatever you're doing with the nodes sort of gets compiled and turned into your world in your 3D scene. So to rotate this, we need a vector input for our Ballroom 2K HDR. And I promise we're gonna go way more in depth on the nodes in the next couple videos, but just bear with me for this point, and it's really easy, I promise. So I'm just gonna hit Shift A, go down to input, and I need a texture coordinate node. These are different options for coordinates that we can use to manipulate the position and rotation of our background image. So I'm gonna click to set that down. Then I'm going to grab the very first dot, the generated texture coordinate, and drag that into our vector dot. Notice how all of these are purple and this is purple. That's how you know it's the same data type. So next, I'm going to hit Shift A, go down to vector, and I'm going to add a mapping node. And that's going to come in attached to your mouse. But if you hover it over the line, you're going to notice the line highlights from gray to white. When it's highlighted white, if you click down, it's automatically going to connect your node in between, which is super useful. Saves like maybe 10 seconds of work. It's great. So anyway, if you zoom in, we only care about the rotation parameter on this. You can rotate this any way you want. You'll notice it updates in real time in the viewport, but the only one we care about is Z if we want to keep it realistic. If we rotate this on the X-axis, all of a sudden we got a pretty weird looking room. So I'm gonna leave these at 0, and I'm gonna adjust the Z until it's rotated. Maybe we'll get this at like, I don't know, 35. Doesn't really matter because we're about to change it some more, because if I hit 0 to go back to my camera view and I start rotating this, you'll notice that this actually affects the lighting in the scene, which is exactly what we want, honestly. So I'm gonna rotate this around until it looks about right to me. I'm thinking maybe about 60 degrees seems pretty cool. And the next thing you're going to notice is that this image is super bright and it's not contributing any shadows to the scene. So we're going to need to add some traditional CG lights to the scene to get some shadows, but we also don't want those shadows to be this bright. So if we want to use this as just sort of a fill light, we probably want to turn the intensity down. To do that, I'm going to go all the way over to the right to my world settings, and I'm going to change the strength from 1, maybe down to like 0.175. Seems pretty good to me. So we still get some nice colors and lighting from our HDRI, but it's not gonna overwhelm the other lights. So now to add our other lights, all we have to do is hit Shift A, go down to lights, and here we have 4 options. A point light is an infinitely small point that projects light in all directions. And then you can also make the point light a sphere. So if it's bigger and it's projecting from different points of a sphere, it'll create nice soft shadows. The next type is a sun. This one doesn't matter where you put it in the scene, it only matters what direction it's pointing. It acts like almost like a real sun, kind of, where all the light rays coming in are completely parallel. This is the ideal light type if you're working on an outdoor scene. Next, we have a spotlight, which behaves just like a spotlight in real life. You can change the radius of it and everything. And finally, we have the area light, which is my preferred light for this scale of a scene. This is either a rectangular or circular light that points in a specific direction, but since it has size to it, you can create really nice soft lighting effects. It's kind of like a softbox in real life. So I'm gonna go ahead and click on area, and that's gonna come into our scene. It's not really affecting anything yet, but if I rotate around and I move it around, you'll notice it does have an effect, but it's really, really dim. So before we change the brightness, I wanna go ahead and put this into a position where it would look pretty cool. So I'm gonna hit 3 to go to my right orthographic. I'm gonna rotate the light to a decent angle. Click to set it down, hit G to move it back closer to the camera. You're gonna notice because it's so dim, it has literally 0 effect on our trophy anymore. So I'm gonna move this right here. And then finally, I'm gonna go to the top orthographic view. I'm gonna rotate it like this, and then I'm gonna move it over because I think directional lighting looks way cooler than lighting that's pretty much coming from our camera. So I'm gonna move this over to the side some. And finally, it's time to change the brightness. So if we go down to our lighting properties, which is super intuitive, it's the one that looks like a light bulb. I'm gonna click on it. And here we can change the power from 10 to something super bright, maybe like 750, maybe like 800, maybe 850. Wow, okay, yeah, we'll get this pretty bright. So at this point, you'll notice we have some nice looking shadows and stuff. The light is doing what it's supposed to. But we do have a couple issues here. For one, we have some light bleed coming through our trophy cabinet, which we do not want. So to fix that, we can change some lighting properties. So I'm gonna click the shadow drop down, and here I'm gonna change the clip start from 0.05 to 0.2. Now, in a lot of scenes, you're not gonna have any light bleed and you don't need to change this. Just know you can mess with this property if you need to fix light bleed. So I'm gonna set that to about 0.2, maybe even 0.25. Looks pretty good. And it's not completely fixed, but that's okay for now. So the second thing we want to change is the shadows. So if you come down here, you'll notice shadows aren't projecting completely from the corner of the object. And there's a really cool feature for that called contact shadows. To implement that, you just have to go back to the lighting settings, and you guessed it, probably, you have to check the contact shadows box. So let's actually zoom in on this, and when I check contact shadows, you'll notice we get some nice contact shadows around the base of the trophy and right here. So I'm gonna turn that off and on a couple times just so you can see what that adds to the scene. It's not perfect because this rendering engine is more of a game rendering engine than a path tracer like the other rendering engine, but it looks pretty good. So at this point, I think I want to make the shadows a little bit softer, so it's like it's coming through a window or something. And to make shadows softer with an area light, all you have to do is scale it up and down. So if I hit S to scale this up and click and give it time to resolve, you'll notice that the shadows are getting much softer. And if you want this to not be so jagged and stuff, we can change some render properties later. But for right now, we just want to get this about as soft as we want. When I first started in CG, I used to go super overboard on soft shadows. So I would be like, bam, ultimate soft, so much softness. But you don't ever want to go overboard on that. You don't want your scene to basically just be completely soft lighting. You just want some nice looking shadows. So I'm gonna make mine about the size of a window, and I think that looks pretty cool. And now we're just gonna add one more fill light to the scene. So I'm going to hit Shift D to duplicate my light, X to duplicate it on the X axis, move it over here, closer to the camera. I'm gonna rotate it towards the object, maybe move it even over further, maybe even down some. We just want this to be a nice fill light. Just position it where you think it should be positioned. I'm gonna hit RR to trackball rotate it closer to facing the camera. And here, right now, it's too bright. It's competing with our key light. So I'm gonna change this by clicking the power slider, and I'm gonna change that down to maybe like 225. And you'll notice if I hide it by hitting H and unhide it, it's having a very small effect on our scene, which is exactly what we want. We just want a little bit more control over those shadows so we can pump in a little bit of color. I'm gonna add some of that Pixar purple personally. I think that's looking pretty cool. So at this point, we just need to change some render settings to make our scene look better. These are like magic checkboxes that instantly make your scene look better. So I'm gonna go back to the camera button, and here I'm going to enable ambient occlusion. And it's really hard to tell what's going on just by looking at it. So I'm gonna zoom in, uncheck ambient occlusion, and you can see that starts to add a little bit of darkness in the crevices and the nooks and crannies, which just adds that much more realism to your scene. And again, back in college, I used to pump this all the way up to max by dropping it down, and I would pump it up just all the frickin' way, just 200. I went way overboard on the ambient occlusion back when I was getting started with CG, because I thought it looked grungy and cool. But really, you want to keep this minimal. So I'm gonna keep it down at like 1.25, and I think that looks pretty good if we turn it off and on. But you can mess around with it, come up with a value that you really like. And the second thing we want is screen space reflections. Again, since Eevee is more of a game rendering engine, kind of. It's like Blender's real-time rendering engine. It's using tricks and cheats and hacks to make it look like a lit scene. This is a rasterization engine versus a path tracer, and I will explain that more in a future video. But just know that all of these things are hacks, just like in video games. So we turn on screen space reflections. That'll allow things that are in our camera view to reflect off of each other. So you can notice it's already starting to have an effect on our trophy, which is really cool. Just adds one more level of realism to our scene. And then if we really want to, we can up the resolution of our shadows as well by changing the cube size to 2048, and that'll up the shadow resolution. And then if we want this to resolve more for our soft shadows, so it's not like so spread out and it's obvious that it's a whole bunch of tiny shadows. We can change the sampling of our viewport up to 64. You'll also notice that our render sampling is already 64. This just matches that so we can see what our actual rendered result will look like in our viewport. If you have a really crummy PC, this might not be wise, but for now, I think it's probably fine. And at this point, I think we are ready to start working on materials in the next video. So I guess I will see you all in the next video. At this point, you should have some basic lighting in place for your scene. And I know I still sound like a broken record, but I really want to encourage you to explore here. Play around and come up with something truly unique to you. If you found this video useful and want to stay tuned for day 6, make sure you hit that like and subscribe button and ring the bell. I'll be releasing these basics videos on a daily basis for the duration of the course. And if you want to come hang out with me live, I'm live at least every Friday over at youtube.com/oraclefish. Also, if you want to download my example files or just support what I do here on the channel, make sure you check out my brand new Patreon, link in the description. Until next time, my name is Chris Folia, I'm your stream scholar, and class is out.